Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Aki. I'm a volunteer and member of the Calgary Horticultural Society. Welcome to our Veggie Troubleshooting Talk, Healthier Plants from Seed to Seedling. This session is offered in partnership with Nutrien. Before we get started, I would like to share with you the Society's land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the enduring and active relationship of Indigenous people with this land, specifically the area in which we inhabit today, also known as the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7. The Society, as an organization, is focused on the well being of the land. We endeavor to honor Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis rights and relationship with the land and the ability for all to grow, live, work, and play within this territory. Thank you. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. Please keep your microphones muted during the session. We will take questions during or after the talk. At the end of the talk, we will include a link to the class evaluation. Please complete the survey. We use this information to improve our program content and develop new class material. A little bit about the Horticultural Society. We are a registered charitable nonprofit organization celebrating 118 years of cultivating Calgary's gardening community. Our mission is to encourage gardening for the enhancement of our environment and the quality of our life. One way we do this is through sessions like this one. I would now like to introduce our instructor, Sheryl Normandeau. Sheryl is a lifelong gardener and holds a prairie horticultural certificate and a sustainable urban agricultural certificate. She's a freelancer writer specializing in garden writing with hundreds of articles published. She's a regular contributor to the Gardener for Canadian Climates, the Prairie Garden Annual, Herb Quarterly, and many more. She's also co-author with Janet Melrose, a Guides for Prairie Gardeners series of the books. Welcome, Sheryl. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining me this evening. This is wonderful. So we're going to be talking a little bit about veggie troubleshooting. So I'm going to specifically be talking about vegetables tonight, although a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be applicable absolutely to any kind of plants that you're going to be growing. So any kind of seeds or seedlings that you're going to be cultivating, this will be applicable to them, but we're going to focus mostly on veggies this evening. So I'm going to talk a bit about specifically seeds and seedlings, and I'm going to get them right up to the transplant part, and then that's where we're going to stop. All right. So we're going to focus on the young and the very, very young parts of plant growing. So let's get started. We've got lots to cover tonight. And if you wish to ask questions, it might actually, just because we started a little bit later, maybe hold your questions to the end, and then we'll do all of them at the end. That way, then I can get through all the material, just in case we run out of a little bit of time. So let's get going here. All right. So sometimes, despite your best efforts, things can go wrong. They do. It just happens. So I'm going to be discussing tonight. This is basically our agenda for the evening. I'm going to be talking about germination issues and why your plants don't germinate, why your seeds don't germinate. I'm going to be talking about problems with your seedlings, so seedling woes, and transplant troubles. So that's the three big topics we're going to discuss tonight. All right. Perfect. All right. So seeds first. I mean, that makes sense, right? All right. So start right. So what I mean by that is start with the best seeds and the best opportunities for you to end up getting thriving plants in your garden. So use new seeds. That is something that, I mean, you've always got seed packages. I've got tons of them lying around from last year. I've probably got a few from maybe even 10 years ago. I'm sure I do. I've got a big seed stash, so who knows? I've got a lot of different seeds. So yeah, absolutely. I am definitely going to buy some new seeds this year. And for some crops, as I'm going to discuss a little bit later on, it is kind of important to do that. But your old ones might work. It's just that they might not germinate. All of the seeds might not germinate in a package, because what happens is viability goes down as your percentage of viability goes down as your seeds age. And this is, I mean, I'm assuming at this point that you're going to be storing your seeds properly. I'm going to discuss seed storage a little bit and how that influences how seeds germinate. But if everything is going right, if you've stored your seeds properly, all of those things, your viability is still going to go down. Now, what the heck is viability? Seed viability is the ability of a seed to germinate, but it's more than that. It's the ability of it to grow into a vigorous plant. So what do I mean by vigorous? I mean that the overall health is going to be good of this plant, that it's going to thrive. It discusses, it incorporates the speed at which a plant grows, the speed at which it establishes itself, things like even its ability to propagate successfully, those kinds of things. That's all tied into plant vigor. And it is affected by things like your soil conditions, weather conditions, water, nutrients, all of the inputs and all of the external factors also work into seed vigor. So it's more than just the viability is more than just the germination. It's also the vigor of the plant that's going to come out of that germinated seed. So how can we ensure that our plants have that our seeds are going to germinate at the best viability rate? You're going to buy new seeds is what you're going to do. So some plants have a very short viability duration. So plants like onions, for example, parsnips are another one. Spinach is a common one. There's quite a few of them, but they only have a very, very short viability. So that means that after a year or two, you're going to get less germination rates out of those seeds. So those are the ones that you're going to buy more frequently if you don't use those packages up. You're going to buy them probably every year, maybe every 2 years, just to ensure that your germination rates are a little bit better on those. Onions are notorious, honestly. That's one of the ones that I pretty much buy fresh every single year because they just don't have a really, really long viability rate. This is all not saying that they're not going to germinate. I am going to talk to you about that a little bit later, but it just means that the percentage is going to be a little bit lower. There are some seed companies that actually publish the plant's germination rate on the package, which is very handy. Because not all plants, I mean, you're going to buy a package of seed and it's very rare that all of the seeds in that package are going to germinate. Sometimes you're going to get lucky. I mean, that's wonderful when that happens, but there's no guarantees with this, right? And there are some plants that are notorious for not having a very, very low viability rate. It's not a vegetable, but sweetgrass is one of them. Sweetgrass, it's very, very hard to grow from seed because it has there's not that many seeds that will germinate if you've been given a package of seeds. So that's a factor. Some plants have really long viability rates. So those are the ones that you can keep in your seed stash for years and years and years. They're probably even going to they're going to germinate after like a decade or more, honestly, a lot of them. So you're looking at things like tomatoes. Tomatoes have a very long viability rate. You can generally, if you can store them for a long time, if you're storing them properly and you're looking after them, you're going to be able to germinate those later on. You might get a little bit of a lower rate, but they don't go as fast as, say, onions and stuff like that. So broccoli is another one with a really, really long viability rate, and things like beets, those kinds of things, Swiss chard, that sort of thing. So you can hang on to those for a while and you're going to be fine with those. So you don't have to buy those every year. You can keep them in your stash and plant them in a couple of years if you don't get to them right away. So not a problem. The other things that you must do, or that you should do, buy from a reputable company. So I'm not going to name any names, but I bet you guys can all think of places where you shouldn't be buying seeds. I'm, nudge some of these big online companies where some of the product is maybe of dubious background. Don't buy seeds from those places. Buy seeds from Canadian companies, preferably. You can buy seeds from all over, but I mean, buy some seeds from Canadian companies that are suppliers that have been in business for a long time, or even some that are just starting out, just ones that have a name, ones that they have good reviews, ones that you're going to spend your hard-earned money and you're going to actually get the product that they say that you're going to get. So yeah, absolutely. Look online. There's a lot of different gardening groups online. Check with the Calgary Horticultural Society. Ask in the forums. People will be able to tell you some of those companies that they like the best, that they like ordering from. You have to think, seed costs money, right? And the prices are going up now. So don't waste your money on a sort of a scam kind of, and they may look good, but they may not be what they're delivered. When they deliver, they may not be what they seem to be. So yeah, buy from a reputable company for sure. Source locally if you can. And now the reason why we want to do that is the seeds that you source locally are genetically, regionally adapted to that geographical location, and the conditions that are in that geographical location, the climate conditions, the soil, all of those things. They're grown, the seeds are collected and harvested from plants that are grown in that region. Sometimes they even have better resilience against pests and diseases. Those are all things that you need to think about. So if you can source seeds locally, head over to a garden show that's being held in your area. I mean, we have one coming up with the Calgary Horticultural Society, checking in at your local CD Saturdays. Go to those kinds of places that you're going to get seeds that are from this area. And those are really, really great ones to try. So definitely take a look at that. Those are ones that you want to be growing. Excuse me. So yeah, absolutely. So that's a good foundation to think about. Now, hang on a second. There we go. So if you're not sure, you've got that package of seeds that are buried in the back of your cupboard, or they're in, like I've got a big tote full of seeds and I'm not sure, maybe I didn't write down the dates, or maybe they didn't have a date on the seed package. Maybe I collected them myself, but I can't remember when I did it. So I want to do a germination test on them. I generally do germination tests before I sow them, because what you want to do when you're doing this is you want to be able to plant those seeds. So you want to be able to start them. So if I might do, like if I've got tomatoes stashed away, for example, I'm not going to be sowing my tomatoes indoors until, probably March sometime, end of March kind of idea. So I'm going to do my germination test just before I sow them, because if any of them are successful with the germination test, I'm going to want to put them in my containers, get them started so I can put them out in the garden in the spring. So to do germination test, grab a paper towel and dampen it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take 10 seeds out of that package, and you're going to lay them out on the paper towel, much like what we've got here in this picture. And then you're going to fold the paper towel over carefully, and you're going to chuck it in a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag. You're going to throw it in the fridge. You're going to leave it there for a few days, and then you're going to haul it out, and you're going to say, oh, interesting. Some of these sprouted. So maybe you have 6 seeds out of 10 that sprouted. That's not bad. That's not a bad rate. That means that I would definitely proceed with using that package. If you've got maybe only 3 seeds out of that 10, I'd still use up that package, but I might be tempted to sow more seeds just to make up for the fact that I know that maybe the germination rate isn't great out of that package. So do these tests and see what you end up with and go from there. It's just a very, very easy, simple way of seeing whether or not your seeds are actually going to germinate or sprout, right? So very, very simple, nice and easy. The other test that is common is the float test. Now, the float test is not foolproof at all, because as you know, seeds come in all different sizes and shapes. There's some really, really big, heavy ones. There's some really, really small, light ones that are just naturally like that. If you throw them in a glass of water to see if they float for viability, the really, really light ones, the non-dense ones, are absolutely going to float. And that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not they're viable. They're just going to float because they're light seeds. Heavy ones like peas and stuff like that they'll probably drop down to the bottom of this, so they're not going to float, right? Typically, you do the float test on seeds that are dense. So you'll do them on beans, you'll do them on peas, those kinds of things. Seeds that are heavier seeds. And what you're going to do is you're just going to throw them in a cup of water, and you're going to let that water sit for about 30 minutes on your countertop, and then you're going to take a look. And with seeds like peas and beans, if they do end up floating in that glass, it probably means that they're not viable. That means that they're not full, that perhaps the seed embryo isn't present, that there might be something cracked, that something's not quite right with that seed. So you can try this, but just bear in mind that the results are going to vary depending on what type of seeds you're using, and it's not always accurate. It works much better for dense seeds, so for bigger dense seeds. So think about that. So the germination test is a little bit more foolproof, so maybe try that one instead. All right. What does a good seed look like? Well, we always think that we know that, right? You take them out of the package, you're assuming they're going to be good, but especially if you're saving them yourself, sometimes it's really, you've got to really take that into consideration, because you might have collected, 100 or 200 seeds off of a plant, but only a fraction of them are going to be necessarily ones that are going to be usable in your garden. It could be a very high percentage, but it might just be like you don't know for sure. So look for ones that are full and plump. That usually means that that everything's intact in the seed, that the embryo's in there, you've got everything ready to go. Your seeds should not be cracked or broken. So if they're split in half, probably not going to work. If they're cracked, they might work, because I'm going to talk to you guys about this later on. Cracked ones might work. So sometimes you are okay to plant cracked ones, but generally if they're split, don't bother with those ones. Make sure they're not moldy. We're going to talk a little bit about seed saving as well. But if they're moldy, toss them. They're no good. Don't bother. Absolutely not. And make sure the color is correct for that type of seed. So in this picture, you can kind of see there's a bunch of different seeds there. There's some beans. There's a couple different types of lentils. There's corn. There's a bunch of things in there. So you can kind of tell, going by the rest of the seeds in your package or going by the rest of the seeds off of your plants, which ones are the right color for that type of plant. Sometimes there are black seeds, right? So a black seed doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad seed. But if you've got, say, all of those corn seeds ready to go and you realize that there's a whole bunch in there that are gray and sort of misshapen and they don't look good, those are probably not good. Don't trust those ones. So absolutely. So just go to take a look at it. When you buy seeds in a store, they do have quality control. So you're not normally going to find anything that's that fits into any of these categories. I hope you don't, because otherwise, there might be a little bit of an issue. But when you're saving seeds yourself, sometimes this happens. So just watch for that. Here's a few other reasons why seeds don't germinate. So there's quite a few. Inconsistent moisture or lack of humidity. So when you sow a seed, they need a bunch of things. They need light or darkness, sometimes depending. They need oxygen and they need water. So those are all things. So if they don't have enough water, they're not going to go anywhere. So, but you can't have too much water. So that's the other side of the scale. But if they have inconsistent water, that's the issue right there. So say you water them one day, you've started your seeds, you put them all in your soil. So say you're doing it right now. Say you're planting onions right now. The last few weeks and right into right about now-ish are good. It's a good time to sow onion seeds, for example. So you're going to layer them all out. You're going to put them in your container. You're going to put them under your grow lights. And then you water the first day, but then you kind of forget about them and you don't water them the second day or the third day. That's not good. What if you water them again on the fourth day and then forget the fifth day and so on? If you're doing inconsistent watering, those seeds are not going to germinate. They need that regular moisture in order to for that embryo to become active. So the thing is if you're not watering, you can actually kill the seed. So you've got to make sure you've got that consistent moisture. So that's why we have humidity domes. We've got the lids on top. We maybe put a shower cap on top. Whatever it is that you're doing to keep that moisture in, that's why we do that. When we're direct sowing in the garden, this is also incredibly important. Same thing goes. You go and you sow your carrot seeds. Carrots are notorious for not coming up. They don't germinate. And the reason why most of the time is because of inconsistent moisture. Carrots seeds definitely need a covering. So a lot of times you're going to say put a board over top. That's like a common one, or maybe some strips of burlap or something like that. Keep that seed bed damp consistently until those seeds germinate. So those are, that might have just saved your carrot crop, because that is that's one of the most common things that happens with them. So make sure you've got that moisture, that humidity, and then you've combated a bit of that trouble. So insufficient contact with growing medium. So a lot of us just like to sprinkle our seeds on top and then we call it a day, right? On top of the growing medium. Make sure it has contact. So press it down really, really lightly. Some seeds don't need any cover. But generally, you're just going to press them down. You're going to just make sure that they have good contact with the soil. If they don't have good contact with the soil, then you might have an issue. So just scattering seeds sometimes isn't workable. I mean, quite often it is. I mean, that's how nature does it, right? I mean, they just, the wind blows, whatever, and the seeds just go wherever. But I mean, for better rates of germination, make sure your seeds have good contact with the soil. To cover or not to cover, I kind of covered that with the inconsistent moisture. Yes, cover it with something, a humidity dome or something like that. But for most seeds, you're going to actually cover them with a little tiny layer of soil. There are a few seeds that require light to germinate. So that means you're not going to cover those ones. You're just going to make sure that they have good contact with the soil. but you're not actually going to cover them with a layer of soil. That includes lettuce. And a bunch of herbs like oregano, dill, rosemary, all of those ones, they don't need darkness. So they don't need that covering of soil. Just make sure that they have that good contact. So yeah, absolutely. But as far as veggies go, lettuce is one of the big ones that doesn't need darkness. So plant it too deeply. We often think we just poke a hole, like maybe with a finger or a trowel or something like that, dump our seeds in. For a lot of seeds, that's too deep. If you've got really, really small seeds, plant them close to the surface of the soil. You're not going to like seeds that are big and dense, like peas and beans, can be sown a lot deeper than, say, a carrot seed, right? Or say an onion seed. Those ones you don't need to cover with a lot of soil. So definitely don't sow too deeply. It's a struggle for them to use up all that energy to get up to the surface of the soil. It takes longer. If you've ever noticed that you've sown your seeds in the spring, direct sown, say in the garden, and you realize that, oh my goodness, they're just not germinating, like they're just not coming up, or they're germinating very spottily. You've got like a seedling here and one here and one here. Quite often it's the depth that you have to investigate. Seed packages always tell you the depth. So follow that. It is a good rule. So definitely follow that. Your soil and your ambient temperature also affects whether or not your seeds germinate. So if you're direct sowing, you're going to want to wait till that soil is a certain temperature, depending on what kind of plant you're growing. So if you're growing a cool season crop, say like a brassica crop, like broccoli, or kale or something like that, you can put them out. You can sow them when the ground is still quite cool. When you are sowing, say, warm season crops like tomatoes or squash, you're going to want to wait till that ground is nice and warm. I'm going to talk about temperatures a little later on, but you're going to want to wait until it's warmer because, yeah, those are warm season crops. They need a little bit of warmth. They're not going to germinate when it's cold. In fact, they might even, get they might be more susceptible to rot at that point. So definitely watch your seed packages for that information as well. They will tell you what to do. So indoors, if you're starting your seeds before spring, so you're over the next couple of months, you're going to be working hard starting seeds inside. Do you really need a heat mat? That's another thing to think about. If you're sowing cool season crops, like I was mentioning, the brassicas, you say you wanted to start your spinach indoors, you wanted to do something like that, you really don't need a heat mat. Those seeds don't need heat to germinate. It's not going to it's not going to help them. It's not going to really hinder them, but it's not going to help them. It's just better just to let them be. If you want to put a heat mat, say under your tomatoes and those kinds of things, go for it. But it's usually not necessary. And if your house is warm, you probably don't need a heat mat. It's when you're starting seeds down in the basement or something like that that you may for certain crops. So think about that. You might be able to save yourself some money by not using one. So this next one is really for direct sowing only, obviously. So sometimes you'll sow your seeds and they won't come up and you're trying to figure out why. It might be just that some birds or some mice or something like that went by after they were probably watching you while you were sowing your garden, and they came by and gobbled up all your seeds. It happens more often than you would like it to. So sometimes that just requires another sowing. So if you're waiting for weeks and you're going, what the heck is going on? Make sure you sow again, because sometimes this is a problem. So. And then stratification and scarification. So for vegetable seeds, that's not really a thing that you need to worry about too much. So stratification is basically you're using cold or heat combined with moisture to break the dormancy of seeds. Quite often, this is something that you're going to use with trees and shrubs. You're going to use it with perennials. You don't typically need to do this with annuals, and especially not vegetables. But scarification is where you're breaking dormancy of that seed by either scratching it or like using sandpaper or something like that, or you're soaking it. So peas and beans, as a lot of us know, benefit from a little bit of a soak before you plant them. That just gets rid of that hard seed coat, softens it up a little bit, makes it easier for the seed to germinate. So yeah, absolutely. Again, your seed packages are going to tell you which ones benefit from scarification so that it's going to say which ones. So absolutely follow that. Generally, it's peas and beans. Vegetables are pretty good. Their seed coats tend to be fairly soft, most of them. So you generally don't have to do any pre-treatments to get them to go. So it's just, but it is a thing. If you find that you say your peas and beans aren't coming up year after year and you're having a little bit of issues, try soaking them before you sow them. So, all right. Seed storage is key. Kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but if your seeds are not stored properly, your germination rate, your viability goes down. So this is like a whole topic in and of itself. But there are a couple things to remember if you're collecting your own seeds or if you purchase seeds in the garden center or something like that, and you're storing them for any length of time. These are the key things that you have to think about. There's a few more, but these are the big ones. So seeds need to have a moisture content of less than 10%. By less than 10%, I think around 5% would be ideal, actually. So 10% is actually pushing the envelope a little bit. 5% is more desirable for sure. So that means that we're going to try to make sure that when we're saving seeds that we dry those guys out as much as we possibly can before we put them into packaging. We don't want to see mold on them when we open them up in the spring. So that means, whatever your storage methods are, you're going to make sure that they are as dry as they can be. Then when you're storing them, you're going to store them in a dry location. So a lot of people will take their seed envelopes and they'll put them in glass jars and just put them in a dry spot. That works really, really nicely. You can do whatever you want. Store in glass jars. So the packaging matters. Jars, you're looking at paper envelopes, glassine envelopes. Those are the ones that you get from stamps. So you can purchase those at if you're a stamp collector, you know what those are and you probably have some on hand. But paper envelopes are really, really good. Those kinds of things, you can make your own envelopes, all of that kind of thing. Store them in so that they will stay dry. That is absolutely key to preventing a lot of the issues with seeds. You're going to want to keep them away from extreme heat, just because it just makes it better for them. The viability rate, germination rate is better if you do that. Now, I always get asked about storing seeds in the fridge. You can if you want to, but think about your fridge. It's kind of a damp environment, right? So think about that. It's not necessarily the very best place to store them, but the cold temperature isn't really going to affect the seeds, so you absolutely can. I would recommend maybe storing them sort of at the back of the fridge, just so that when you're opening and closing the door, there's not a fluctuation of temperatures. But honestly, keeping them in a room, like a room temperature room, is just fine. You don't have to go to any extremes. You don't have to put them anywhere special or anything like that. But just make sure that they're dry. That's imperative. That's all you have to think about. So, all right. Let's step over into the seedling stage. Let's talk about that. All right. Damping off is one of the biggest problems with starting your seeds. So it's happened, I don't know how many times I've had it happen. I do take a lot of precautions to make sure it doesn't happen. So it hasn't been something that I've been plagued with in the most recent years, but I know when I first started gardening, it was regular. So yeah, absolutely. It isn't actually something that you as the gardener are at fault for. So take that into consideration. You're not the problem. It's caused by various pathogens. So one of them is Fusarium. That's the most common one. So it's just something that is in the growing medium, perhaps, that you're using. If you're using soil, it actually can actually be in the air as well. It can be all over the place. Seeds can have it, can carry it. There's all kinds of things where it can come from. So it's not something. I mean, you're bringing it in from somewhere, but it's not necessarily something that you have control over. And it's common. It's very, very common. So it also is exacerbated when you've got humidity over 85%. Now, when I started off this talk, I was talking about humidity and that you got to make sure that your seeds have that desired humidity in order for them to germinate. Those are the conditions that proliferate this kind of thing, that make these pathogens spread and proliferate. So unfortunately, it's a catch-22. You've got to keep that humidity, but then you've also got the danger of this. So if you've ever seen it, it can happen in a matter of hours. It feels like anyway. It's actually been taking place long before you actually notice it. But you can go out into your seed trays, say one morning, and all of your tray seedlings have collapsed at the base, or some of them have. You can have like half a tray do it, or just a couple plants, whatever. They've collapsed at the base. They look really watery. Things look kind of gray and liquid. It just doesn't look right. It's not mold, and you can tell it's not mold, but it just means that everything is just basically collapsed. So it's not something that you can cure. So once it's happened, those seedlings have got to go in the garbage, and then you're going to have to sanitize your containers and make sure that whatever growing medium you're using, maybe you want to get some fresh stuff, whatever it is that you need to do, but it's not something that you can fix. Once it's happened, your seedlings are gone. And it might spread to other seedlings rapidly. You can try taking out, like if you've got cell containers like this photograph is showing, if you've got cell containers, you can take some of that out and see, but it might just have already spread. So I normally toss the whole thing if it happens. So unfortunately, it's just part of it, but hopefully you've got enough time to reseed. So things that you can do to prevent this from happening or try to reduce the risk. Make sure that you've got lots of air circulation. So now that whole adage about running a little tiny fan near your seedlings, it's a really, really good one. And not only does it help make the stems a little bit stronger as these plants are growing, give them that little air movement. It sort of mimics nature, right? But it also makes sure that these kinds of things don't proliferate. It gives them that circulation around the leaves and that kind of thing, and make sure that these kinds of diseases don't happen. So do not overwater. So on top of all that humidity, don't overwater in addition to that. Watch your watering levels, watch your humidity. If it gets too much, you might need to take that humidity dome off. When your plants have come off, you shouldn't be using the humidity dome anyway. So when your plants are seedlings, you don't need to. Just be careful with the watering then at that point, right? Don't be using anything else. So use sterile growing medium. So if you're using potting soil, it might not be sterile. So seed starting mixes are typically, they contain sterile ingredients. So you're going to, at this stage when they're still young, maybe start your seeds in seed starting mixes, something that does not contain actual soil. And that will also reduce the risks of these kinds of pathogens. So you can always transplant them later on to a soil-based container before you get them out into the garden in the spring. So just at this stage is crucial. So once the plants have matured, they don't dampen off. It's just at this crucial stage, sort of when they're very, very young. So, all right. Mold, very, very common. It happens. I mean, and you don't even really realize when it happens. You maybe overwatered only once, and it can happen, right? So this is the whole thing. So it's not necessarily a chronic thing. It's just something that might happen one time. So that is white or gray fuzzy mold on the soil surface. So don't confuse this with root hairs. If you've ever grown radishes or something like that, you know that they have those really, really fuzzy root hairs. Sometimes those will poke up even when the plants have germinated, and once you've got seedlings going, you'll still see some of those root hairs kind of poking up out of the soil. Don't confuse the two. They're not the same. You can tell when you start looking at the plant very, very closely. The mold will usually be on the soil surface. It might be right around the plant. Sometimes you can kind of scoop that mold away from the surface, so you can just kind of take the surface soil out, and then if you make sure that you're watering, that might be enough. Sometimes you might have to transplant to make sure that you don't get the mold on the plants. Just water when it's necessary, and don't overwater. That's the key to mold. Absolutely. Sometimes if your growing area is very warm, mold will proliferate as well. So just watch all those conditions. When you've got seedlings going on, watching and monitoring on a daily basis, sometimes a couple times a day, is a really, really good thing to do. Just practice watching and looking for signs that things are going wrong, right? All right. Leggy stems, we've all had this. You maybe don't have a grow light. Maybe you're growing them in a window. Maybe you do have a grow light, but you're growing so much stuff in there that you've got sort of like the plants are just, some of them are stretching, some of them are not. So it is due to lack of light. It's also due to high temperatures. So if you've got grow lights that are maybe, say, not LED based, if they're warmer lights like fluorescents, sometimes the heat that it's coming off the light itself might mean that you're going to end up with leggy or seedlings, because the plants just grow so fast that you can't help it. It's just part of it, right? So that's just something that you have to think about. Sometimes if your room is too warm, or if you're using a heat mat or something like that, that will happen. So definitely watch your temperature in your growing site and see if you can combat it that way. Sometimes when your seedlings are overcrowded, say you've sown a ton of seeds in a little tiny container, yeah, legginess will happen because they're all stretching to get to that same light. They're all working really, really hard. And so sometimes they'll end up getting leggy because of that. So do watch for that. You can combat all of that. Thin out your seedlings, watch the temperature, give them more light. They need more light than you normally need, like than you think they do usually. So yeah, absolutely. Use grow lights if you can. Supplement natural light with that. If you like, if you've got a windowsill and you can use both grow lights and natural light, go for it. If you grow only solely with grow lights, do that as well. Lots of really, really good stuff on the market that you can use. Position the lights closer to the seedlings. Now, you don't want to position it so close that the seedlings die because they're too close to the light, but the heat that comes off the light, even with LEDs, there is a little tiny bit of heat, not much. But the light itself, you don't want to do that. But you want to have it nice and close. So a couple inches is sometimes all you need to keep them from getting leggy. And like I said, thin them if you need to. So fungus gnats, it's a perennial problem. It can be a problem with seedlings. It can be a problem at mature stages. It can be a problem sort of late in the season when you're bringing in plants for the winter. It happens with your house plants. They're just, yeah, they're just part of life. They love damp soil. They absolutely love damp soil. So if you're overwatering, you're often going to get fungus gnats. They will sometimes come in with the soil that you purchased. They'll come in with plants that you've gotten from, a garden center or a greenhouse. They'll come in from the outside when you're bringing in your plants in the fall. They just happen, right? So the thing is to combat them, there's a few little tricks. So you can use those sticky yellow tape traps. Very, very common. You can find them in any hardware store. You can find them in garden centers. They're very inexpensive. You can normally trap a lot of adult flies that way. So definitely try using those. And these guys, like if you've ever gotten a fungus gnat infestation, these guys are tiny, but they're mighty. There's usually lots and lots of them. They reproduce very, very quickly. And they come sort of, they sit in the surface of the soil. That's where they lay their eggs. That's where they hang out. So when you're moving your plants, or say you're doing anything with the plant soil, you're going to end up getting fungus gnats coming up, and they're going to be flying in your face and stuff like that. You'll know that those are fungus gnats. So sometimes using sand on the surface of the soil will help because they need that that barrier prevents them from laying their eggs in the soil. So it's something to think about. You can try it. It does work sometimes. Use just horticultural sand. You can get bags of it in the garden center. Just sprinkle a bit on top and see what happens. It is sometimes an effective barrier. Reduce irrigation to make sure that that damp soil doesn't welcome them. Ensure the container has drainage. If you've got stopping wet plants with stopping wet roots, not only are you looking for a mold problem, but you're also maybe looking for a fungus gnat problem. So make sure that your containers are very well draining. You've got holes in the bottom, and you've got maybe saucers or something like that. Try bottom watering. That always is a tip that I would use anyway. You can remove the soil at the top of the tray. So what I mean there is at the top of the tray or the pot. So if you've got a fungus gnat infestation, they're usually only on the top layer of the soil. So you can sometimes scoop that soil out very carefully, remove it, get rid of it. And sometimes that will take care of several members of the population, sometimes hundreds. If the infestation is really bad and it's a mature plant, you can transplant it. But with your seedlings, you're not going to do that. So the thing is try that trick. There are nematodes, which are little tiny microscopic worms that you can purchase in the garden center and use those. They're very expensive, but you water them in, and then they will actually dispatch the larvae of these fungus gnats. So it's something that you can try if you're really desperate for a solution. There are also, people have heard of probably mosquito dunks, mosquito bits. Those are BTI, which is a bacterium, and they're used on larvae of mosquitoes and various other things as well, caterpillars, that kind of thing. But they have actually proven to be effective against fungus gnat larvae. So, I mean, you can use those as well. I can purchase those in the garden center and in big box stores. They will work too. You might have to do a combination of all of these things to get rid of it. Hopefully you don't have, any problems with this, but sometimes it just is an issue. And it can be an issue, like I said, at any stage during a plant's lifetime. So it's just part of it. It's, if you're a gardener and you've been gardening for decades and you haven't had a fungus gnat infestation, that is amazing. Kudos to you, because it's never happened to me. Anyway, yeah, no. So definitely try a combo of all of these things. All right, let's talk transplants. We're doing good for time, so let's talk about transplants now and some of the problems that you can have with transplanting. All right. Just as I was saying earlier about warm season crops and cool season crops, when you're talking about your seeds and when you're direct sowing out in the garden, when you're ready to go in the spring and you're planting directly into the soil, it actually matters when you're transplanting as well. Of course, makes sense, right? So you've spent all of this money, time, energy, whatever it is that you're doing. You've spent all of this work getting your seedlings ready to go indoors, and you're ready to transplant them out in the spring. And you know how weird our springs are in Calgary. They can be a real challenge. So you're going to be wanting to watch your temperatures like a hawk, because temperature is the key to all of this. So your soil temperature and your ambient temperature, which may not always match. So if you've got a soil thermometer, that's very, very helpful, but you don't have to go out and buy one of those. You can just sort of tell when you're feeling the soil, you can tell the temperature of it. You can tell how cool it is. You know, by what the weather's been doing the past few weeks, you can kind of sense. And if you've been gardening for a while, it just gets easier. This whole this touchy-feely part about gardening, where you can feel what's going on in the soil. And you can tell what the ambient temperature is. Look at the temperatures though, follow them, because it becomes essential. So I'm going to be talking about vegetables primarily, like I said. So for cool season crops, you're looking at things like beets, broccoli, cabbage, arugula, kale, peas, radishes, Swiss chard, spinach, all of those things. Those are ones that you can transplant out a little bit earlier than you can transplant out some of the other plants. You're looking at a soil temperature of 5 to 10 degrees Celsius at least. And when I'm saying this range, I'm talking probably higher in the range if you can possibly make it. And I know our weather is all over the place, and that sometimes this is not reachable, and sometimes you're going to have to go out and cover, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But that's your goal. That's what you're aiming for. So your ambient temperature, you want your overnight low to be about 10 degrees Celsius or just below that for those crops. Again, I understand how it is. If we wait until it's consistently like this, sometimes we'll never get our gardens in, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous to think that we're going to wait for like 2 consecutive weeks of this before we plant our gardens. You're going to get your garden in. Just sort of, that's your guide, right? We are going to use different types of protection methods to make sure that your plants are safe during this time, but that's your goal. And yeah, it's just the way it is here. So your warm season crops, so we're talking peppers, squash, tomatoes, beans, corn, cucumbers, all of those things, you need to wait a little bit longer. They can't tolerate the cold. They're just not going to. They're going to get grumpy and fussy. And if they don't die, they're going to just plateau. They're not going to be really, really great. They're just going to go, hey, whatever. What did you do to me? So yeah, absolutely. If you're planting them out, you're going to look for a soil temperature of about 15 degrees. Your ambient temperature is going to be about that as well. 10 degrees is sort of your minimum on that. Again, like I said, This is just a guideline. You might be able to push that envelope, and every year is different. I mean, I don't know what this year is going to hold. We're going to hope for a nice spring where we've got some nice, lovely warm rains and good temperatures, but who knows what's going to happen. So that's what you're looking at for temperatures. And yeah, definitely watch which crops need which. So yeah, it makes a big difference. Okay, transplant shock. Um, I remember when I was first starting out gardening, I had I had borrowed. I was using a land share. I was working with a friend it was her property in her backyard, and I was growing the vegetables there. And I had never grown peppers before, and I had not really even ever really grown a garden before outside. So I had very, very carefully spent a lot of energy and time in getting my peppers ready indoors, had it all ready to go. I had some nice, beautiful, healthy plants. Took them outside on a hot day. It was way hotter than it should have been. And I was thinking to myself, peppers, they can tolerate the heat because they can. But I did not. I just plucked them in the ground, and it was so hot, they turned white and they died right away. By the next day, they were toast. So that was a big severe case of transplant shock. So combined with a few other things that I'll discuss in a bit. So yeah, the wilted stems, the leaves, you couldn't fix it by watering. They were just toast. They got crispy. They were just terrible. They died right away. I mean, it was just literally a day or two, and they were all gone. So all my work tossed in the garbage because I didn't think about what I was doing. So definitely harden off. I will talk more. There's a whole slide dedicated to hardening off. Don't rush it if you can. It's tempting to because you're itching to get those plants out in the garden. But rushing it is not necessarily the best thing to do, depending on what our weather is like. Sometimes we have really, really hot springs, right? I mean, in the past few years, we've had a couple springs where we had really, really warm temperatures in May. So the thing is you kind of got to watch with that too. So there's different things you have to juggle depending on that variable, right? Plant when the temperatures and conditions are appropriate. Now, if I had not gone out there and stuck those pepper plants in there in the middle of the day on a very hot day, I might have had some success. Maybe if I had put them out in the spring or sorry, in the morning, maybe if it was cooler, maybe it had been raining, maybe I might have had some success, some better success. As it was, I wasn't paying attention. I just threw them out there. So plant when the conditions are appropriate. Cooler temperatures are generally better for planting. Morning is quite often because you're not dealing with the heat of the day. A gentle rain is so nice to go out and transplant plants in. So a nice warm rain. So yeah, absolutely. Really, really good thing. You may need to shelter them, especially in this climate. You may need to shelter them against cold or heat. It just depends, maybe wind. So you have to think about all those factors. It may be that you put your seedlings out, but you're not going to expose them fully to the blast of whatever is going on outside right away. So definitely when you're hardening them off, we'll discuss that as well. That's part of the thing of that, but you may still need to shelter them even if you've hardened them off. Be very gentle when you're handling the plant during transplanting. So you want that root ball to be as intact as it possibly can be. So depending on the container that you're using, you might be able to transplant if it's one of those biodegradable containers or something like that, where you can put the whole container in the ground. You can do that. Depending on what you're using, cut the plastic open if you have to, whatever it is. Be very, very gentle when you're removing the plant. Definitely don't be rough because you want that root ball to be as intact as possible. Know which plants are fussy about transplanting and might be better off directly sown. I am not going to tell you that you can't transplant carrots because you can. It's not fun. And why? I don't know. You don't need to. Carrots do quite well direct sown. Those are the kinds of crops I'm thinking about, though. Root veggies generally don't need to be started indoors early. You can just start them direct sown. So those are classic examples of ones that you can do. Some squash plants, if you start them too early inside the house, I mean, it is a nice idea to start your squash indoors. But if you start them too early, they start getting rambly. They're all over the place. You might end up breaking them when you're transplanting. Be careful with those kinds of things. But yeah, you'll know after a few years of gardening, you'll know which ones are the ones that are more difficult than others. Typically, like I said, it's root veggies, just direct sow them. But like I said, you can transplant carrots. It's not necessary. All right. Okay. Importance of hardening off. This slide is dedicated to all of those things that you have to do to harden your plants off. Now, I know that a lot of gardeners don't do this, but instead what they're doing is they are providing shelter. They're maybe putting their plants out into a cold frame. Maybe they're making sort of a tent structure around their plants. Maybe they're transplanting them into raised beds that have row cover fabric over them. They're providing some kind of protection in those initial stages. So this isn't hard and fast, but I think it's a really, really good idea. And if you're beginning, I think this is something that you really, really should strive to do. Experienced gardeners sometimes have a little bit, have more tips and tricks that, that they do something that they've come up with over the years, where they feel that works for them, and that's great. But this is a really, really good idea to do. Regardless of your skills, but it's something that you want to think about. So why are you going to do this? It's going to reduce that transplant shock that I was talking about earlier. It's going to reduce your risk of losing plants due to sun, wind, fluctuating temperatures, all of those factors that can do in those seedlings that you've carefully nurtured. So how long does it take? It should take a week. It can take 2 weeks. 2 weeks is great. 2 weeks is amazing. If you can actually harden your plants off for 2 weeks, phenomenal. But a lot of us have started so many seedlings inside our homes, like hundreds perhaps, that we just can't, we're not going to lug them in and out every day. We're just not going to take those trays in and out. It's just too much work. So you have to think about your capacity, but then you also have to think about, what the best things are for those plants. So how does it work? So you're going to take your seedlings out for an hour or two on the first day. Then you're going to gradually increase the number of hours that they're outside over that week. So you're going to start them, you're going to place them in an area where they're out of direct sunlight, out of the wind, and there's sort of a sheltered spot. You're going to gradually increase that exposure if the temperatures are warm enough through the week or through that 2 weeks. You're going to make sure that they're watered this whole time when they need water, and you're just going to gradually increase their exposure to the elements through that week or two that you're hardening them off. This is just a really, really good idea. It just acclimatizes them to the conditions outside. So definitely do that. Try it out and see. So harden off your cool season plants. That's, again, like I said, the broccolis, the kales, the radishes, all of those kinds of things. Harden those guys off before your warm season ones, like tomatoes and peppers and those kinds of things. That's just because of the temperatures, right? So your cool season ones are going to be able to go out a little bit sooner than the other ones, as I mentioned earlier. Do I need to harden off plants that I purchased in the garden center? It depends. Sometimes garden centers have already hardened them off. I know a few suppliers that actually harden them off before they send them to the garden centers that sell them. So you can find out by asking, or you can just assume that you need to harden them off and just go through that process. It doesn't hurt to do it for a little while anyway, depending if they've been in a greenhouse, it's nice and warm in there. So you may need to just acclimatize them to the outdoor temperatures. So it doesn't hurt to do it for a few days. But yeah, sometimes depending, your annuals, quite often you'll go into the garden center, they're already ready to go. So, and if you're buying plants from a big box store, they're out there in those elements anyway. So, so definitely those ones are ready to go. So think about that. If you're growing your own plants in your own greenhouse, and you're going to take them outside and plant them in your garden, give them a little bit of a hardening off period. You don't need to do it for as long as, say, you are growing perhaps in the house or something like that, but give them a little bit of time to get used to the outdoor conditions, because the greenhouse is a completely different scenario than outdoors. It's nice and sheltered, it's warmer, those kinds of things. So, but yeah, they will be a little bit tougher because they're greenhouse growing. But yeah, absolutely, give them a little bit of hardening off. Protection from the elements. So when you're first transplanting all of your seedlings outdoors, it doesn't hurt to have a bunch of things on hand. If you're able to go with a raised bed with this is row cover fabric over top, so this is spun polyester or spun polypropylene. You can do that. It really, really helps to keep a lot of the wind out. It keeps the soil temperature a little bit warmer. It is definitely something to think about. A really, really useful tool. This is just a very, very DIY setup. This is over a raised bed and it's just hula hoops. And then you can see there's binder clips holding the fabric, and so you can just unhook them and just go inside and check on your plants. You can actually water through the fabric. So this is just something, row cover fabric is a really, really nice thing to have in your toolbox as a gardener, especially here in Calgary. It's just really, really handy for those sort of shoulder seasons. It's good during the season as well for a good many things as well, like insect control and those kinds of things. So it's just a very, very useful thing to have. Get good quality row cover fabric. I made the mistake one year when I was starting out of buying it at the dollar store. And I ended up coming out to the garden after a windstorm, and it was in the neighbors' yards. It was down the street. It was shreds, ribbons on cars. It was just useless. So, so yeah, buy good quality. Get it at a box store or like a hardware store or a garden center. Definitely pick up decent stuff. This is reusable. So for a few seasons. Some of it is UV resistant to some point. So you just gotta just think about how it works. So you can use cloches. So you can actually buy cloches. You can get glass ones, you can get plastic ones. You can buy them in the garden centers or in the hardware stores. Those are great just to pop over your a few seedlings or one seedling or something like that when you're transplanting them out, just as sort of in a jiff. They can be used for decades. So they're really, really great. The glass ones are beautiful. They're decorative on top of being useful. So they cost a lot more, but they're wonderful. So go for it. In a pinch, use plastic pop bottles, milk cartons, whatever it is you've got on hand. Cover up your plants if you feel that the overnight temperatures are dropping. Cardboard boxes will work for that. Baskets, like even a laundry basket, you can do. They've got holes in the sides, but if the temperature's not going to plummet that much, they can keep the plants out of the wind a little bit. So something to think about. Burlap tents, you can just buy burlap and wrap them around stakes and make a little mini tent. Think about the row covers, like I said, hoop tunnels. That's all these kinds of constructions that I've got like in this photo. Cold frames, if you have the ability to make a cold frame in your yard, that is a huge season extender on both sides of the season. They're quite easy to make. There's tons of DIY, different types of ways of doing them on the internet or in books. Something really, really fun to try. If you've got space for them, really, really good option for sure. You're going to need to stake everything down because once the wind scoops up or you get a storm or something like that, that's for anchorage and for elevation. So sometimes you're going to need to stake higher over top of the seedling. So just watch what your needs are there and make sure you've got all of that stuff available. But other than that, really a lot of this is just you're focused on the protection. It's not really that it's beautiful necessarily. It's just that you're focusing on the protection for sure. All right. Now, watch the weather. So if your temperatures are too cold, your seedling growth may plateau or slow. If you've ever noticed that your tomatoes were growing, so well inside the house, they were getting monstrous. Your seedlings were doing really, really well. You got them outside. You did everything right. You did the hardening off process. You're protecting them. You're doing it all right, or what you think is right. It could be just that the temperatures are too cold. It's not necessarily your fault. When you transplanted them out, it may have been warm at that point, but then we had another one of these, cold spells or something like that happened. And then what happens is they just don't grow for a while, right? They just sort of slow down, do nothing. Sometimes flowering is affected, sometimes fruiting is affected later in the season. So the key with this is like with tomatoes, especially because they're little princesses sometimes when it comes to this, is to plant them out a little bit later than you would even think, maybe even in June sometimes. Sometimes it's worth it just to baby them and coddle them a little tiny bit, and then they might not plateau. It's quite a good idea. Sometimes May can be a little bit of a rough month. So yeah, definitely watch your temperatures. If it's too cold, some plants just hate that, right? So think about that. All right. Sun scorch. This plant is not suffering from sun scorch. It's a plant that's healthy. Sun scorch, when it happens, the plants are going to look kind of white and splotchy. They're going to look like maybe you spilled some bleach on them. They're kind of white and blotchy. The leaves might wilt, the stems might wilt. They just look not right. So what happens with that is that they've gotten too much sun, maybe only on part of the plant or maybe on the whole plant. You perhaps transplanted them when they was too hot, or it was too hot right after transplant. Now, all is not lost usually. If you catch this in time, you can use a shelter, do this like preemptively if you can, put a shelter around them when you're transplanting just to prevent this from happening. But even if it has happened, the plant will quite often rebound. So put a little tent around it, keep it out of that hot, bright sun, and it might rejuvenate. Be gentle on the watering. It might need a little bit of water, but it won't need too much. It's not wilting due to the fact that it has no water. It's wilting because of that sun and that excessive heat. It's wilting due to the stress of that. So be careful with that. Try to transplant, like I said earlier, cool or rainy days are really, really good. So yeah, absolutely watch for that, because that is a really, really common one that happens. Again, tomatoes seem to be really susceptible to this. Tomatoes are susceptible to everything. Cutworms. Have you ever gone out in the garden? You've got your seedlings, say they've come up, maybe you direct sowed and your seedlings have come up, or maybe you've transplanted seedlings just freshly, and they're still quite young, so they're maybe about the size that they are here in this photo. And you come out and all the leaves are sliced off at the base of the plant. They're just laying there right next to the plant. And you're going, what on earth happened? It's right where the stem meets the soil. It's unexplained. There doesn't seem to be a reason for it. It's not like a wind came through and did that, or if it had been a deer or a rabbit, they probably would have eaten the plant. It's just this weird thing. It was probably cutworms. So these little guys are from sawflies. They're the larvae of sawflies. They like to dig right just underneath the soil, the base of the soil. So at the base of the plants is where they're going to take out the plant, is because that's where they live. They're kind of ugly. They look like little grubs. They're really ugly, honestly. And they will just literally just cut off. They only need a few nutrients, but of course they're only going to get the ones that they can reach. So those are the ones at the soil surface. So they take out that layer, and they can do a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. They can take out a whole row of seedlings in just, overnight. So it can be, yeah, a real problem. So what you can do is you can go out very early in the morning. If you've noticed that you're starting to get a cutworm problem, you can go out really, really super early in the morning and you can find them. They'll be crawling just under the soil surface. So if you just sort of take a finger and wear gloves, take a finger and kind of just, move the soil around the plant, you'll probably rouse them. And then you can just pick them out and destroy them. Or you can use barriers. Barriers are effective ways of preventing them. So what I mean by a barrier is you're going to use, say, I use actually cut up yogurt containers. We eat a lot of yogurt in this house, so I use I take the bottoms off the yogurt containers, take the lids off, and then I just put them around, and I just sink them a few inches into the soil. You don't need to sink them very much because the cutworms don't typically dig really, really deep. And you got to think these root systems on these plants aren't very big at that point anyway. It's just where that line is. You want to cover that where the plant meets the earth. So definitely use a few barriers. You're only going to need them for a short amount of time. Once the plants mature, cutworms don't care anymore. They're probably moved on in their life cycle by that time. It's not a big deal. They're probably adults already by then, so you don't have to worry about them after a certain point. They don't attack mature plants usually. So it's just something to think about. They're extremely common. They're pretty much in all of our soils, that kind of thing. There's so many different species of sawflies in Alberta. It's just part of it. It's part of gardening. But it is a solution that you can do if you've got seedlings that are affected. So, all right. Slugs, yeah, yuck. They're more active at night, and when we're having really, really damp weather, right? They like that kind of damp conditions. They like damp soil. So these are when you've got a slug problem, you do, because there's going to be ragged holes torn in the foliage and the stems and any kind of the plant tissues. Now, the slugs always tear ragged holes. They're not nice and round and beautiful. They're not, yeah, they're always messy holes. So you'll probably be able to guess that there's a slug problem. Probably you'll also be able to see them. You can see them sort of at dusk. You can see them in the morning if you go out really, really early. So those are the times when you can go and you can pick them off. Take a flashlight out at night and just pick them off and destroy them at that point, or move them, whatever you want to do. Yeah, it's up to you. Definitely that will take care of a huge amounts of the population. You can use yeast traps. So the good old-fashioned beer trap. It works because of the yeast in the beer. So you don't have to use beer if you don't want to. You can just take a few teaspoons of beer, or not beer, yeast and some water and a little tiny bit of sugar. Whip that up into a container and throw it in, and they're very attracted to that kind of thing. So yeah, so they will, look after themselves. Sharp barriers. I know it's traditional to put egg shells or something like that with a sharp edge, sand, those kinds of things. But they've done lots and lots of studies on slugs and snails, and they actually can climb across razor blades. They don't care. That mucus that they emit when they're crawling around, that protects them, their bodies. Even though their bodies are soft, it doesn't matter. So they work to a little, maybe to some extent. They'll just go, yeah, whatever. I maybe don't want to be here at this point, but they're not foolproof. So it's actually better to do manual removal or use a yeast trap. So yeah, absolutely. Something to think about there. Some years are worse than others. I mean, you get a slug year and then you don't have one for a few years. It really has to do with those damp conditions. So, all right. Yellowing leaves. Typically that's a sign of a nutrient deficiency, but it could also be that you overwatered. It could be that it's too cold. There's a lot of different reasons why leaves turn yellow. Nutrient deficiencies can be addressed if you do a soil test and you know what kind of nutrients that you need. Typically, just giving regular fertilizer, balanced fertilizer will typically work, but sometimes they need just a little bit something extra. So you can do a DIY soil test. If you've got this plaguing your entire garden and you've got a really, really large garden and you keep having plants with really, really yellow leaves, something just doesn't seem right, you may wish to do a soil test using a lab. But generally, just maybe a little bit of fertilizer that's kind of a balanced fertilizer is going to be helpful. Just watch for these kinds of things. But sometimes it's overwatering. Watch your watering. Whether they're, like however you're growing your plants, it's always something that you have to think about, whether you're doing them indoors and say you've got house plants or you're doing whatever. Watering is always a key issue. Overwatering or underwatering is always something. You've got to strike that balance, right? So temperature will also cause the leaves to yellow. So if your plants are too cold, think about making shelters for them. Think about all those ways that you can protect them so that they're not too cold, and so you can avoid that issue. And this, I think, is the last slide, which is great because we have lots of time for questions. So crispy brown leaves, quite often, there's lots of reasons for that. You can probably guess most of them. Too dry, too hot, fertilizer burn. You applied too much fertilizer. You didn't do according to the package instructions, and perhaps you've applied a little bit too much. Fertilizer is always something that you have to be careful. More is not better in the case of fertilizer. Do follow instructions when you're applying it. All of those kinds of things. Watch what you're doing, regardless of what you're using for amendments, soil amendments, those kinds of things. So, and herbicide drift. Occasionally that happens. It happens quite often with rural properties that have gardens and maybe a farmer's field is nearby. Sometimes there's herbicide drift. It can happen for various reasons. So just watch for all of those things and keep an eye on your plants. There is definitely, you've got always the opportunity when you're out in the garden, take a look at them, monitor them. Sometimes if you catch some of these issues really, really early, you can fix them. And you can put in measures that are maybe low cost and very effective, and you can fix these issues. And so that these plants will end up having the vigor that they need, so that they're going to grow into thriving plants that are going to give you really, really great harvests. So all of these things are things to think about. So yeah, absolutely. If you have any questions, let's do it.
There are some in the chat, Cheryl. So
Perfect.
I'll start with the first one. Corinne had one. What if there's a
Okay.
green cover over the soil in starting cell trays? Is that mold?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Can you not hear me?
It was just a little quiet on that one end. I just couldn't. So it was a
Okay.
cover on,
So in the chat, Corinne has a question.
yeah.
And what if there's a green cover over the soil in starting cell trays? Is that mold?
Oh, okay. So it's gray or green? Gray?
Green,
Gray?
green.
Green? Okay, green. Sometimes that's whatever it could be an algae or something that's growing in whatever that growing medium that you use, that there could be an algae that is in that mix. It's not necessarily green usually isn't an indicator of mold, but I think it could be an algae. So, or maybe a lichen, perhaps. It just depends. Maybe sometimes you end up having plants that end up with liverwort in them as well. So none of those things are necessarily bad. But I would just maybe scoop that little top layer off and just remove that, and then maybe add a little tiny bit more soil. Just be very, very careful when you're doing that so that you're not disturbing anything. It doesn't sound like mold at all. Mold is going to be gray or it's going to be white. So you're going to be seeing it fuzzy. It's just going to look wrong. But if it's green, it's probably not mold.
Thank you for that. The next question is ambient temperature your air temperature, not soil temperature?
Right. So ambient temperature is your out like your conditions that are outside, so your air temperature. So that's yeah, exactly. It's not your soil temperature. There are two different things. So and both of them matter when you're transplanting plants and when you're sowing seeds.
Thank you. The next one is on tomatoes. So the
Okay.
question is, will glass cloches protect from both cold and wind or just wind?
No, they'll protect against cold as well. So yeah, absolutely. They do wonders with wind. And I would always recommend using them. But they do protect quite a bit against the chill, though. They will be useful for that. They'll provide a little bit of insulation. So yeah, definitely use them. Yeah.
Thank you. The next one, can you put slugs in the green compost bin?
Yep. Yeah, you can. You don't want to
Next
destroy them? Yeah,
one,
go for it.
what about leaves curling inwards from the sides?
So the leaves are curling inward. Okay, so sometimes that can be nutrient deficiency. It can also be according to like that can also happen with temperature as well. And I would usually think that it's temperature. So sometimes that's when it's a nutrient deficiency, sometimes there'll be discoloration as well accompanying that. But generally, it has to do with temperature. So it's probably that the ambient or the soil temperature and or both are too cold. So think about that. But yeah, that's quite often what that is an indicator of.
Thank you. Diana has a question. What is
Sure.
the best medium for starting seedlings? Peat moss, garden soil.
Okay, so potting soil quite often has a risk involved in it in that there's soil-based issues with it, pathogens perhaps in it. So you're looking at things like what I was talking about there when I was talking about damping off. You might have the issues with that if you're using potting soil. Not always, it doesn't always happen, but to reduce that, you're going to be using, you can use a seed starting mix. So that's typically something that's a sterile media. So it might be peat moss, it might be perlite, it might be a combination of those kinds of things. So that's what you're going to do. Something that doesn't have a soil or compost base, right? To start your seeds in. You are going to transplant those into a soil, probably into a soil base. You don't have to necessarily if you're using the right nutrient mix and that kind of thing. But yeah, you'll be doing that at a later date. But to start them, it's a good idea to do them in a sterile medium.
Thank you. Ellen has a question. I have trouble with bean germination every year. Are they really cold sensitive? When is the best to plant, especially climbing beans?
Okay, so yeah, beans are a warm season crop. So if you plant them when it's too cold, they will not germinate. They always have issues. So one thing you can do is, like I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, you can soak them before you plant them, but wait until the temperatures get quite warm. So you're looking at about 10 to 15 degrees is your air temperature. So that's the temperature you're seeing when you look at the weather forecast on the news. Um, and then you're looking at least 10 degrees as your soil temperature. So you don't, like I said, you don't need to go out and buy yourself a soil thermometer, although they're really fun. So you can, and they're not that expensive. But I mean, you'll know when you're feeling it. So when the air temperature is warmer, that's when you're going to sow your beans. You don't want to start them too early because then the germination is going to be spotty on them. Actually, beans are notorious for rotting if they're planted too early, especially too if we get an addition of cold and wet together. That can be an issue. So plant them a little bit later. I mean, you don't have to wait till June necessarily unless the weather makes us do that. I do sow beans in June. They grow really quickly. They come up really fast. So I never really worry about them. I just direct sow them sort of later in the season and they're fine. I usually even, I do succession sowing with beans quite often. So the thing is then you're going to grow beans and then you're going to harvest and you're going to plant them in staggered sessions. So, I mean, I think, yeah, beans just wait on them a little bit and generally you'll have better germination rates. So, and do try soaking them and see if that helps you a little bit.
Thank you. Leslie has a question. The germination test, how long in the fridge before planting?
So you're normally only going to do this as a pre-sprout. So normally it only takes a few days. I can take up to a week depending on the seed, sometimes longer than that. But it's gonna be about no more than a week. Generally, a lot of these guys are going to they're gonna germinate within a couple days. You're gonna see those sprouts come up within 2 or 3 days. So then you're going to be able to pot them up at that point. You're just going to sow them like you would a normal seed, put them in some soil. If it's like, I mean, if you're pre-spreading them, like say you want to sow your tomatoes in March or whatever, and you pre-sprout your seeds before you sow them. Again, when I'm doing this, I'm talking sowing indoors in pots, because not direct sowing in March, obviously. But you're starting them indoors before you're going to plant them out later. You're going to just do it just before, so maybe a week, and then you're going to pot them up. So.
Thank you. Rebecca has a question. How do you get rid of algae on the surface?
So you can just scrape it off. You can just take like a little spoon. Just use something that's like if you've got spoons that you use in the garden. For some reason, my cutlery drawer always ends out in the garden. I don't know. I have I have a problem. I constantly take my kitchen utensils out there, even though I have the proper stuff. But if you've got a spoon that you use in the garden, try that. You can use like even just a plastic spoon, and then you can dispose of it afterwards, whatever you want to do. So you only have to scrape the top layer off. And like I said, be very careful not to disturb the plants. So don't disturb the roots, don't disturb the stems of the plant. So be very careful about it. It's probably not going to harm the plant in any way. But I mean, I know you're probably going to want to get rid of it. So, or as much as you can. So it's, yeah, don't worry about it too much. It's not going to act like mold or anything like that, where it's going to probably kill the plant. It might compete a little bit with the plant, but it's not going to cause big issues. So.
Thank you. Kathy has a question. I live on the edge of the city and have a problem with both flea beetles and wolves. Any suggestions?
Okay, so it was flea beetles and voles, right?
Yes.
Okay, so flea beetles, they typically aren't going to affect your seedling plants, but they're going to be a problem later in the season. So remember in that one slide where I had the row cover fabric over top of the raised bed, you can do that in an in-ground bed as well. That can, when you transplant out your seedlings, or when you're sowing your crops, direct sowing outdoors, you can set up something like that and trapping them, keeping them outside and keeping the seeds safe from that can prevent those insects from laying eggs inside there, and then it can prevent them from accessing it, so that they don't cause problems with all of your brassica crops and stuff like that. So you can use physical barriers like that. but you're going to put them on at the start of the season, and you're basically going to leave them on the whole season, which is totally fine. You can absolutely do that. You can open them up to water and harvest and all of that kind of thing. But you're going to basically cover them for the duration. So that is a way of getting rid of flea beetles and starting off on the right foot with them. Voles, they're not swayed by that. They're a little bit more of a problem. Typically, they're not as much of a problem in the garden and in the summer, although I know in one of the community gardens that I'm in, the voles will sometimes they'll come after our zucchini for some weird reason. They really like zucchini. So you go in and there'll be bite marks all over the place. So they'll be really, really bad right now. Once the snow melts, you're going to see the tunnels all over the grass and that kind of thing. The only way really to get rid of voles is to trap them or deter them in some way with the regular methods when you like what you would use for mice. They don't really respond to anything else. There's not really anything that you can use to cover your plants to prevent them from getting in. With trees and shrubs, of course, you can put up barriers on the trunks so that they don't nibble the trunks during the winter time. But with your veg, there's really not a whole lot you can do to prevent them from accessing, other than, like I said, forcing them to move on, get a cat or have a dog, something like that. Those kinds of things. Those are the only really ways that you can get rid of them in the garden. So, but typically, like I said, in the summer, they're usually not as active. They're out eating something else somewhere else. It's just the spring sort of season, and sometimes in the fall too. They're going to be very active. And of course, you'll see them, the tunnels that they've left in the wintertime when the snow melts. So yeah, it's hard. They're tricky. We've got lots of them here.
Thank you for that. Question from Sophie. How do you know if the plants are over-fertilized? How can I prevent caterpillars and aphids in brassicas? How do you feel about organic and synthetic fertilizers?
Okay, so you can use whatever fertilizer you want. Honestly, I don't have a fixed opinion on that, and if I did, I'm not going to share it because I think everybody's got their own opinions about what they want to use and how they source it. It's really, really up to you what you want to do. Fertilizers and amendments act in different ways. So you have to think that your fertilizers are going to deliver nutrients to your plants right away. And your amendments, which are things like compost, that kind of thing, are going to usually be more slow release. You don't necessarily know what kinds of nutrients are in that in your amendments. When you're purchasing a package of fertilizer in the garden center, you know what's in that. It just depends. It depends on your situation, on your preferences, on whatever it is that you wish to use, and what your aim is, what your goal is with that. So absolutely. Now, over fertilizing. Like I said, you can tell the plants are going to show signs of fertilizer burn. So that may be really, really crispy leaves. They may brown really rapidly. They may look like they need water, but they don't. They don't seem to be responding to a lot of watering, those kinds of things. So yeah, burning is not a good idea. If you're using packages of fertilizer that you're purchasing in the garden center, make sure you adhere to the guidelines, the rules that are on the package instructions. If you're using amendments, generally it's really, really hard to over fertilize, like ones that have nutrients in them. But I mean, yeah, just use caution when you're doing any of that kind of thing. More is not better necessarily. You're not really changing anything by adding more and more and more. Sometimes though, there's a caveat with that, like with compost and stuff like that, where you're changing soil structure. It helps with those kinds of things. But when you're talking just strictly nutrition, just follow all of the package guidelines. And I think I forgot the middle question of that. Can you remind me? I'm so sorry.
So it was how can I prevent caterpillars and
Ah,
aphids in
yes. Okay.
brassicas?
Right. And then aphids, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So aphids, They are gardeners. I mean, in Calgary, we have aphids almost every year, right? Some years we have an aphid apocalypse, like I like to call them, when you've got so many of them that there's nothing that you could possibly do to stop them all because there's just millions of them. They're in the trees, they're in like everything, and there's really, really nothing that you can do in a year like that. Aphids, you can generally sort of get them off of your plants with very, very simple methods. You can take a gardening glove and you can dampen it with some water and you can run your hands over the plants. And so we're talking more mature plants than your little seedlings. But generally, you're not going to get an aphid infestation until sort of middle to late part of the season anyway. So you're just going to gently wipe them off and you can get rid of thousands that way. You can use a cloth to do that instead if you don't want to use a glove. But that will get rid of huge, huge masses of the population. You can also spray them off with really, really hard blasts of water. That will usually take care of them. You have to be careful that you make sure your plants can take that kind of activity. But definitely that will usually get rid of lots and lots of them, dislodge them off the plant and get rid of them. So I mean, there's just a few things. Aphids are just part of gardening. It's just something that we have. They are very, very successful in what they do, reproduction and carrying on their life cycles. So I mean, they're just part of it. There's lots of biological controls for them. Lots of insects that love to eat aphids. So make sure your garden is friendly to ladybugs, lacewings, all of those things. And you can just all of those methods together will help. It's just some years we get an insane amount of aphids, and there's just not a whole lot you can do at that point. It's just part of it. Sometimes it's just beyond what anybody can do for control. So, and then, oh my goodness, what is it? My brain. What was the other one again? Aphids and
Uh,
what was it?
Caterpillars.
Caterpillars. Caterpillars. So caterpillars, you have to think about life cycle of insects. Caterpillars can be butterflies. They can be moths. Sometimes they're, not the good ones. Sometimes they can be, they can mistake them for the larvae of soft flies, those kinds of things. So you do have to kind of, caterpillars are hard to identify. So it's really, really hard to tell which one is a good one and which one is a bad one. And they will eat your plants. Even butterfly caterpillars, I mean, that's what they do, right? That's how they become a butterfly later on. So you have to think about it that way. But if you really do want to remove them, you can try things like BTI, which is that bacterium I was mentioning earlier. I don't know. You can remove them by hand picking. You can move them onto other plants. You can do things like that. Biological controls, there are lots of birds and animals that love to eat caterpillars. So quite often they will attack them. It's part of the natural life cycle. But I mean, yeah, you can definitely do a few things to combat it. But yeah, it's just part of it. So yeah.
Thank you. Ellen has a question. So
Yeah.
zucchini often get a moody looking leaves on transplanted plants after first few weeks. What is happening? Does removing bad leaves help enough to save them?
Right. Okay, so zucchini and other squash plants are susceptible to powdery mildew, and it depends on the conditions. So it will sometimes happen later in the season, and it will sometimes happen kind of early in the season. It depends on the weather, honestly. And it's very, very common. It's just something that happens. It's not something that you've done wrong. It's not something that even your timing when you're transplanting out or when you're growing them even from seed, it's not something that you've done. It's just part of gardening, especially in the weather conditions that we have. So yes, if you notice it on just one or two leaves when the plants are really young, you can remove those leaves and then hopefully it will not proliferate and it will not move on to the other leaves. Watch your air circulation around your plants. Don't plant your zucchini crops too close to one another. So don't plant your plants too close. And if it is a more mature plant and it's got a lot of different leaves on it, it's got tons and tons of leaves, like very dense, you can prune out some of those leaves to try to make it open up the air a little bit. Also watch with your watering. Don't water too much. But yeah, it's just part of it. A lot of plants are susceptible to powdery mildew, and squash plants just tend to be one of them. But yeah, absolutely. Those are a couple things that you can try for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Question from Stephanie. After performing a germination test on aging seeds, can those that have sprouted be potted on to grow for that season?
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
starting
That's
with
what I would
older
do.
seeds.
Was that?
So, the question continues. Does starting with older seeds affect
Yeah.
plant health during the growing season?
Ah, good question. All right. So first of all, yes, pot them on. That's what I would hope that you would do. Don't waste those little seeds that are springing to life. Absolutely. That's why I always recommend, like, if you're doing your germination test now, um, and then you're not potting them on because you're not ready to start your seeds yet. And you know that it's going to be another like 2.5 or 3 months or whatever or more before we can actually get out into the garden. And you know that you've got a crop that grows super fast. So do your germination test just before you're going to plant them or before you're going to start them indoors, just so that you don't waste any of those seeds. Definitely pot on the ones that sprout. Absolutely. That's what you're doing is you're basically taking a measure of sort of the percentage at which they're going to be successful as germination, right? So yeah, that's the thing. And if you've got older seeds, it might slightly alter the vigor of the plants. It's quite possible, but it's not probably going to be at a rate that any kind of home gardener is going to even notice. They're going to be pretty much as good as new seeds. You're not going to necessarily notice anything. Now, if we were, doing sort of a science-based experiment and we might be able to tell if we were growing them and we were able to measure all these things, perhaps. But you're going to be probably okay as a home gardener. You're not going to notice that there's going to be any difference. So yeah, go ahead, plant them. Absolutely. Make sure you use up that old seed for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Question from Frank. What's the best way to adjust the pH in yard soil to alkaline?
Okay, so our soils are very alkaline on the prairies. So this is your garden soil. So you typically most plants are going to do all right with that kind of a pH. You're not necessarily going to need anything. And yeah, so you normally don't have to adjust for pH. I would recommend doing a soil test before you decide whether or not you need to alter pH. pH is kind of it's very specific to plants, the plant type for one. There's very few plants that need more than sort of a middle ground pH. So you're looking at like if you need to acidify your soil, you're doing that for things like blueberries or rhododendrons, azaleas, those kinds of things, right? You're going to acidify your soil. So in that case, you're going to test your pH, see if you need to. But generally, our soil alkalinity and the pH of our field soils in Calgary area are generally suitable for just about all vegetable plants. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Unless you do a soil test, yeah, and they recommend that you add something, then yeah, other than that, I wouldn't bother. But I think honestly, I think your veg are going to do just fine with the pH that the field soil is. If you do a soil test, you're going to be like the lab will be able to recommend to you the type of amendment that you should use and how much of it that you should use. But typically, you're not going to need to do any of that. So if you live outside of the province, or you live maybe up in northern Alberta where the soils are a little bit more acidic in some areas, if there's a different sort of adjustment that you may have to make for that. Generally, pH doesn't need to be adjusted unless you're noticing a huge significant problem and that maybe nutrients are not being taken up properly or that kind of thing. Again, a soil test is your best friend on that one, and then the lab will recommend how much and what you should use. So yeah, typically, no, not for veggies. You don't need it. So.
Thank you. Ellen she does not have a question, but she's put a comment in there saying, wolves eat my beans as they sprout. Solid plastic barrier help. So
Yeah,
maybe that's
that's
something
that's
the rest of the
exactly
group
right.
can.
That's
Yeah.
great tip for sure. Yeah.
Question from Rebecca. What are your views on adding a thin layer of vermiculite on the surface when planting seeds?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. Vermiculite is one of those sterile mediums. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. It's not going to hurt anything. In fact, it's not a bad idea at all. Vermiculite is a little bit on the pricey side. So if you're doing a lot of different seeding projects, it might end up, making a little bit of a dent in your project. But if you're only doing a little bit of vermiculite on top, totally cool. I think that's a great idea. So yeah, absolutely. It might help hinder things like rot and that kind of thing, mold, those kinds of things. Yeah, not a bad idea at all.
So that was the last question that we had. Anyone else, any questions um, before I don't think anybody has any more questions. Thank you,
Perfect.
Cheryl. We learned so much tonight. Very exciting
Excellent.
for everyone on the chat, including myself. Lots of tips to take and more successful
Good.
this summer.
Thank you, everyone.